Mondays at Fairview High were always the worst. But this Monday, it was about to redefine the word. Ethan Carter sat in the second-to-last row of room 204, where the heat never reached and the desks wobbled like baby deer on tile. He kept his head down, hoodie up, earbuds in, though no music played. It was a shield, not a soundtrack. On the board, Mr. Langston scribbled something in clean, precise strokes, then stepped back like an artist admiring his latest masterpiece. "Let's start the week off strong, shall we?" he said, voice smooth but with a blade underneath. "Let's see who here can handle a real challenge." He underlined the problem dramatically. 3 carat x plus 1 plus 3 carat x minus 1 equals 30. Find x. A low murmur ran through the room. Some kids leaned back. Others looked at the board like it was written in Martian. Ethan's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the first time Langston opened with a surprise challenge. But it was the first time he looked directly at Ethan when he said, "Mr. Carter. Care to give this one a try?" A few heads turned. A couple kids chuckled. Ethan tensed. Of course he was picked. The only black kid in the room. The only one wearing hand-me-down Jordans and carrying a backpack held together with duct tape. Jasmine, seated beside him, whispered, "You got this." Ethan hesitated. The problem danced in his mind, numbers clicking into patterns the way only he seemed to see. But standing in front of the class, under Langston's gaze, he stood anyway. The class fell into that weird, almost too quiet silence. Ethan walked to the board, marker in hand, palms sweaty. He stared at the problem. Then he wrote. 3 carat x plus 1 plus 3 carat x minus 1 equals 3 times 3 to the power of x plus 1/3 times 3 to the power of x equals 3 plus 1/3 times 3 to the power of x equals 10/3 times 3 to the power of x equals 30. 3 to the power of x equals 9. X equals 2. Done. He turned, expecting something, anything. And he got it. Just not the kind he wanted. Trevor Richards, rich kid, loud mouth, golden boy quarterback, snorted. "What, did you memorize that from TikTok?" Laughter. Not everyone. But enough. Langston looked mildly impressed, but mostly annoyed. "Well," he said. "That was correct. But let's remember, this wasn't a test of intelligence. Just an icebreaker. Don't let it go to your head, Mr. Carter." The room stilled again, but this time not with anticipation, more like the quiet before a door slams. Ethan returned to his seat, heart thudding. Jasmine whispered, "Forget him. You crushed it." But Ethan didn't smile. Not this time. After school, Ethan walked the 5 blocks home, cutting through the lot behind the Family Dollar, past the mural with peeling paint and the busted payphone that hadn't worked in years. His apartment building leaned a little to the left, like it was tired of standing. Inside, the living room was cramped. A stack of laundry sat on the couch. The TV buzzed with static until his dad slapped it twice. "You're home early," said Daniel Carter, ex-Army sergeant turned night janitor. "Langston called on me in class," Ethan muttered. His dad looked up from reheating ramen. "You freeze?" "No," Ethan said. "I solved it. Whole thing." Everyone laughed. Daniel's expression didn't change much. It rarely did anymore. War does that. But his eyes softened, just a little. "They laughed because you made them nervous," he said. "Ain't your job to make them comfortable?" Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, opened his backpack, and pulled out his worn black notebook, the one with math scribbles and codes and what Jasmine jokingly called hieroglyphics. He flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top in bold, block letters. "The problem they didn't think I could solve." Then he copied down the equation from class. But underneath it, he started sketching something else, a harder version. A real challenge. Something that couldn't be solved in 30 seconds. He remembered something Mr. Langston once said in a mocking tone. Some problems are simply impossible. Not everything has a neat little answer. Ethan didn't believe that. Not for a second. The next morning, Ethan asked Langston if he could look through the old math competition packets. The teacher raised an eyebrow. Extra credit, he asked. No, Ethan replied, calm. Just curious. Langston handed him a folder. Well, good luck. But fair warning, those questions aren't exactly beginner level. Ethan nodded. Good thing I'm not a beginner. Over the next week, something shifted. During lunch, while most kids gossiped or stared into phones, Ethan and Jasmine pored over problems on lined paper and napkins. I'm telling you, Jasmine said one afternoon, chomping on carrot sticks, you're low-key a math ninja. Ethan cracked a smile. You're the only one who thinks that. Nope. You do too. You just don't say it. Friday night, while Daniel worked the janitor shift at Fairview Middle School, Ethan sat on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by crumpled papers. A math problem from a 2004 symposium stared back at him from the screen, unsolved. Considered functionally impossible without graduate-level research. He didn't flinch. He printed it out. Taped it to the wall. Then stared at it for an hour. The numbers weren't just numbers, they were a story waiting to be decoded. Patterns. Rhythm. Logic in chaos. And that's when he felt it, not confidence exactly, but something more dangerous. Conviction. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The bell rang, signaling the start of another day. But as Ethan walked into room 204, the air felt different. Mr. Langston was at the front, already writing something on the board in his neat handwriting. His back was turned, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a subtle tension in the room, something that wasn't there the day before. All right, class, Langston said as he turned to face the group, his eyes scanning over them all before resting on Ethan. Today, we're going to test your skills. But this isn't your usual test. This one will push you a little further. I'm calling it the challenge. A few murmurs ran through the room. The students shifted in their seats, uncertainty growing. Ethan could feel his palms starting to sweat. He'd been dreading this moment ever since the first day he'd solved that warm-up problem. Langston picked up a piece of paper and handed it to Ethan. Carter, he said, his voice smooth but hard, I'm going to give you a real challenge today. Something that requires more than just quick thinking. I'm curious to see if you can really back up your confidence. Ethan took the paper, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes scanned the problem. It was a monster, numbers, variables, and exponents tangled together like a spider's web. Langston had a smirk on his face, but it was subtle, almost imperceptible. He was testing Ethan. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting. Everyone was watching him now. All eyes in the room were on him, waiting for him to fail. But he wouldn't fail. He couldn't. The chalk squeaked as he walked to the board, the feeling of being under a microscope settling heavy on his shoulders. His fingers shook, but his mind was clear. He could do this. He just had to focus. He began writing. 3 caret, 2x plus 1, 2 caret, x, 1, equals 50. The numbers seemed to swim in front of his eyes as his mind whirred, breaking down the equation in pieces. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not this time. His thoughts moved quickly, like the gears of a clock ticking in perfect synchronization. Step 1, simplify 3 caret, 2x plus 1, as 3 times 3 caret, 2x. Step 2, rewrite 2 caret, x, 1, as 2 to the power of x slash 2. Step 3, move on to solving for x. His hands worked quickly, but Ethan wasn't just solving this equation in front of the class. He was fighting for something, his right to be seen as more than just a quiet kid in the back row. When he finished, he turned around and faced the class. X equals 3, he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. There was a long pause. Silence. Then, a few students started whispering. Ethan could barely hear them over the pounding in his ears. Langston was the first to speak. Well, Carter, I have to admit, that was impressive. A few more students muttered, clearly surprised, but Langston's expression didn't soften. Instead, he gave a curt nod and moved on. Let's see if anyone else can keep up. After class, Jasmine found him at his locker. Her eyes were wide, a mix of admiration and disbelief. Dude, you were amazing in there, she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. You looked like you were in a whole different zone. Ethan shrugged, trying to hide the small smile tugging at his lips. It's just math. Just math. Jasmine repeated, her eyebrows raised. You made Langston sweat, Ethan. He doesn't give out praise like that. You nailed it. He closed his locker with a soft click, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I guess, he said, looking around to make sure no one was listening. But I don't think it's about proving anyone else wrong. It's about proving to myself that I can do this. Jasmine nodded slowly, taking in his words. That's deep, man. You're not just solving equations, you're solving everything. Ethan didn't respond. His mind was already racing, thinking ahead to the next challenge. Langston's words still echoed in his head, I'm curious to see if you can really back up your confidence. That night, while his father worked the night shift, Ethan sat in the living room, his textbook open in front of him. He had no interest in watching TV or scrolling through his phone like the other kids in school. His world was in the numbers, in the equations that seemed to hold the key to something greater. He turned to the page he'd bookmarked earlier. The unsolved problem from the symposium. It was still taped to the wall above his desk, taunting him. Ethan picked up his pencil and began working through the problem. It wasn't just about solving for X anymore, it was about solving for himself. Proving that he could achieve something that no one else believed he could. Something bigger than his broken family, bigger than the struggles he'd faced, bigger than the stereotypes he fought against every single day. As he scribbled on the page, the numbers started to come alive. The patterns unfolded before him, each step feeling like a victory. He was no longer just a kid from the wrong side of town, the quiet black boy in the back of the class. He was a genius in the making. He could feel it in his bones. The next morning at school, Ethan was different. There was a spark in his eyes, a confidence in the way he held himself. He wasn't afraid of Mr. Langston's challenges anymore. He wasn't afraid of the whispers behind his back or the mocking laughs. As he walked into room 204, Langston was already at the front, waiting for the class to settle. All right, Carter, Langston said, his voice cutting through the chatter. I've got something for you today. Something a little tougher. Ethan didn't flinch. He was ready. Bring it on, he said quietly, his voice filled with an unshakable calm. Ethan could feel it. That tension. It was in the air every time he walked into room 204 now. And it wasn't just from Mr. Langston. It was from the students. His classmates who had once dismissed him, who had laughed when he solved that equation on Monday, were starting to notice. It was in the sideways glances, the half smiles, the hesitant admiration. But Ethan didn't care about any of that. Not anymore. He had a bigger goal now. He had his own challenge to conquer. As he sat down in his usual spot at the back of the classroom, he scanned the room. Trevor, the quarterback, was playing with his phone under the desk. Mia, the cheerleader, was chatting with her friends, tossing her hair every few seconds. They were all wrapped up in their own worlds, unaware that Ethan's was rapidly changing. He was more than just the quiet kid now. He was the kid who solved the impossible problems. Langston entered the room, carrying a thick folder. He didn't waste any time before addressing the class. "All right, class. I've got something for you today." "A real challenge," Langston said, his voice casual but with an edge. He knew his students had been talking about Ethan's performance the other day. He was going to make sure everyone knew who was still in charge. He turned toward Ethan, and for a split second, his eyes narrowed, a challenge behind them. "Mr. Carter," Langston said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Since you've been so impressive lately, I'm going to give you a problem. One that I'm pretty sure you can't solve." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, but his expression didn't change. He didn't need to prove anything to Langston. The only person he was proving anything to now was himself. Langston set the paper down in front of him, a challenge printed in bold letters. "Find the value of x in this equation. 2 caret x plus 3 plus 3 caret x 2 equals 105. Ethan stared at the problem for a long moment, but instead of feeling the weight of pressure, he felt the familiar pull of focus. The numbers danced in his mind as he began to break them down. First step, simplify the terms. Second step, check for common factors. Third step, solve for x. He picked up his marker and walked up to the board, his movements measured and calm. He didn't rush. He never rushed anymore. The key to this was to be patient. To trust himself. So, he took his time, carefully writing out the steps. 2 caret x plus 3 caret x 2 equals 105. Step 1, simplify 2 caret x plus 3 as 8 times 2 to the power of x. Step 2, simplify 3 caret x 2 as 1/9 times 3 to the power of x. Step 3, solve for x. He knew this was going to take a bit longer than the last problem. But that was the point. It wasn't about speed. It was about accuracy. As he worked, the room went quiet. He could hear the faint rustle of paper as some students turned their attention away from their phones, watching him in silence. Even Langston had stopped moving, his eyes following Ethan's every move. He was close now. His hand hovered over the board, about to make the final step when... all right, Trevor called out from the back, breaking the silence. His voice was loud and cocky. "Let's see if Mr. Carter can finish it before the bell rings." There was laughter from a few of the students, but Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even look up. He took a deep breath and finished the last part. X equals 4. Ethan stepped back, wiped his hands on his jeans, and turned to face the class. There was no drama. No grand flourish. He'd solved the problem. And that was enough. For a moment, no one spoke. It was just silence, and in that silence, Ethan felt the weight of something else. Respect. Langston looked at the board, then back at Ethan. His face remained stoic, but there was a slight tilt to his head, as if he were reconsidering something. "Well," Langston said, his voice not quite a compliment but not quite a dismissal either, "you solved it. I'll give you that." The room stirred, but it wasn't the usual jeers or mocking. There was something else now. A shift. After class, Jasmine was waiting by Ethan's locker. She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "You did it," she said, practically bouncing on her feet. "I mean, everyone saw that." Mr. Langston actually looked impressed. Ethan gave a small shrug, trying to hide the pride bubbling up inside him. "It's just math." Jasmine laughed. "No, it's not just math. You just made Langston rethink everything. You're becoming a legend, Ethan." "Legend?" Ethan repeated, a little unsure. "You're not just the quiet kid anymore," she said, her voice serious now. "You're the one who can solve anything. And you know what? I think it's starting to scare some people." Ethan didn't respond at first. Jasmine had a point. He'd seen the way Trevor and the others looked at him when he'd finished the problem. It wasn't mockery this time. It was something else. Something deeper. Maybe, Ethan said, his voice quieter than usual. But I'm not doing this for anyone else. I'm doing it for me. That night, after dinner, Ethan sat alone in his room. His father had worked another long shift, and the apartment was quiet. There was only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. He picked up his math notebook, the pages filled with equations, formulas, and notes. He flipped through the pages, scanning the problems he had already solved, some simple, some far more complex. He had learned so much in the past week. But there was still so much more to prove. The problem from the symposium still hung on the wall above his desk. He glanced at it before turning his focus back to the pages in front of him. It wasn't just about math anymore. It was about belief. The belief that he could go farther than anyone thought possible. The belief that he could push past the walls others had built around him. And then, just like that, the answer to the problem on the wall clicked. It wasn't about solving equations anymore. It was about solving the puzzle of his own life. The next day at school, Ethan walked into room 204 with his head held high. He wasn't the quiet kid anymore. He wasn't the kid who would cower in the back row. He was the kid who could solve the impossible. And he was ready for whatever Langston, or anyone else, threw his way. The days blurred into one another after that challenge in room 204. Ethan's life had taken on a rhythm, an unfamiliar but comfortable one. Every morning he woke up early, poured a cup of coffee for his dad before heading out to school, and every afternoon he buried himself in his textbooks, solving problems and practicing equations. It had become routine, even though his confidence was steadily growing. At school, things were different now. His classmates no longer looked at him with the same indifference, or worse, mockery, that they once had. Now, they respected him. Some even asked him for help with their homework, and while he rarely offered more than a quiet smile in return, it was a small victory. But it wasn't enough. Ethan knew that in the back of his mind. He wasn't just trying to fit in or solve problems for the sake of impressing people. He had bigger dreams, bigger goals. And somewhere deep inside, he felt the weight of his own expectations pushing him forward. It was during lunch on Friday when things started to shift again. Ethan was sitting at the back of the cafeteria, the usual spot where he found comfort in the quiet, when he saw Langston walk in. His math teacher's tall, broad frame cut through the sea of students like a lighthouse. Ethan's heart skipped a beat, the nagging thought that something was brewing in Langston's mind clawing at him. Langston caught his eye from across the room and motioned for him to follow. Ethan hesitated for a split second before gathering his things and walking over. "Carter," Langston said when Ethan arrived, his voice low but not unfriendly. "Can I talk to you for a second?" "Sure," Ethan replied, trying to mask the nervousness in his chest. Langston's serious tone was unusual, even for him. It was a warning. Langston led him outside to a quieter area near the edge of the school grounds. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the grass, but the air had a crisp chill to it. Ethan stood silently, waiting for Langston to speak. "I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a big math competition coming up next month," Langston said, crossing his arms as he looked at Ethan. "It's regional. Students from different schools are participating, and it's a chance to showcase your skills. The winners get scholarships." Ethan's heart raced. Scholarships. That word echoed in his mind. For someone like him, someone who came from a working-class background, with a father working late shifts and a mom who had walked out years ago, this was more than just an opportunity. It was a lifeline. "I've seen how you've been handling yourself lately," Langston continued, his voice softer now. "You're good, Carter. Really good. I'm recommending you for the competition." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Wait, you're recommending me?" Langston nodded. Yeah. I think you've got what it takes to win this thing. But I'll be honest with you, this competition isn't just about solving problems. It's about standing out. About showing the world you can do more than what they expect. And it's going to be tough. There's a lot at stake. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to process what Langston was saying. He was putting him on a path that might change everything. But with it came pressure, expectations that were heavier than anything he'd ever faced before. I don't know if I'm ready, Ethan admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. I'm just a kid from a small town. What if I fail? Langston looked at him for a long moment, his eyes steady. That's the thing, Carter. Everyone's afraid of failure. But it's not failure that matters, it's how you respond. You'll never know what you're capable of unless you try. Ethan thought about those words. What if I fail? That had always been his biggest fear, disappointing himself, his dad, everyone who had ever written him off. But Langston was right. The fear of failure would always be there. He had to face it if he was ever going to achieve anything beyond what was expected of him. I'll do it, Ethan said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. I'll compete. Langston gave him a rare smile, a flicker of approval in his expression. Good. You've got a lot of potential, Ethan. Don't waste it. The next week, Ethan threw himself into his studies even more. He spent hours after school poring over his textbooks, solving past competition problems, and practicing techniques he hadn't even considered before. Jasmine noticed the change in him. You're on fire lately, she said one afternoon as they sat in the library. I've never seen you this focused. It's like you're training for a battle or something. Ethan cracked a smile. Maybe I am. But this isn't just about school. This is everything. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Everything? What do you mean? Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I mean, this competition, this could be my ticket out of here. I don't want to stay stuck in this town forever, Jasmine. I want more than just surviving. I want to thrive. And I think this competition could be my way to prove that I'm not just some kid from the wrong side of the tracks. Jasmine didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, her eyes softening. I get it. But just remember, Ethan, you don't have to do it alone. You've got people who believe in you. Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Jasmine believed in him. Langston believed in him. And somewhere deep down, he was starting to believe in himself. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Ethan practiced day and night. He couldn't afford to slip up. This competition wasn't just about math. It was about proving he was more than the quiet kid, more than the kid no one expected anything from. On the day of the competition, Ethan's nerves were raw. The bus ride to the venue was filled with an anxious energy. He could feel his stomach in knots, his palms sweating despite the chill in the air. When they arrived, Langston gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. You're ready for this. Just trust yourself. Ethan nodded, but the words felt empty. How could he trust himself when the whole world was watching? Inside the building, students from different schools milled around, some chatting nervously, others huddled in small groups, already discussing strategy. Ethan felt small amidst them, but he also felt something else, a fire burning deep within him. He wasn't just here to compete. He was here to win. The competition began. Problem after problem flashed on the screen, each one harder than the last. Ethan stayed focused, his mind racing through equations, working through every challenge methodically. But he knew, he could feel it, that the real battle was in his mind. The same fear he'd fought so many times before tried to creep in, but he refused to let it win. Not today. Not when everything he had worked for was right in front of him. The competition hall buzzed with nervous energy as the students filed in, finding their assigned seats. Ethan could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him, a subtle reminder that he wasn't just facing an ordinary exam. This was it. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that could change everything. Langston had given him a few final words of encouragement as he entered the hall. "Just stay calm, Ethan. You've already proven you can do this. Don't let the pressure get to you." But even Langston's steady voice couldn't quiet the storm of anxiety that churned in Ethan's chest. Ethan took his seat at one of the long tables, feeling the eyes of competitors from other schools glancing over at him. Some were chatting nervously, while others appeared stoic, as if they had done this 100 times. Ethan couldn't help but notice that none of them looked quite like him. He was the only one in the room who wasn't from a well-off family, the only one who hadn't spent years training in expensive after-school programs or private tutors. His journey had been raw, scrappy, built from hours alone in his room, solving problems until his eyes burned. For a moment, he felt a pang of doubt. What if I'm not good enough? But then he remembered the words he'd told Jasmine, "I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving." And right now, in this moment, he had to remind himself of that. The competition began with a sudden click, and the screen at the front of the room flashed to life, displaying the first problem. Ethan's heart raced, but he focused. He'd done this before. "I've solved harder problems than this," he thought, pushing the doubts aside. Problem 1. Solve for x in the equation. 5x plus 3, superscript 2 equals 81. Ethan's mind immediately went into overdrive. This wasn't the hardest equation he had seen, but the time pressure was real, and his pulse quickened with each passing second. He took a deep breath, recalled the steps he needed to take, and began solving the equation with steady hands. Step 1, expand the squared term. Step 2, simplify the equation to isolate x. Step 3, solve for x. It felt natural, as if he were floating through the problem, his hands following the motions without hesitation. He could feel the rhythm of the equation, the balance of the numbers, and he knew this one cold. Within minutes, he had his answer: x equals 3 or x equals minus 3. He looked up and saw the other students around him scribbling away, some pausing to check their answers, others glancing nervously around. He could already tell that the pace here was different from anything he had experienced in school. But the thing was, Ethan was already in his zone. He wasn't concerned with anyone else. He was concerned with solving. He hit the button to submit his answer, then moved on to the next problem. The next few problems were more complex, but Ethan felt like he was gaining momentum. Each new equation felt like a challenge he was born to face. He solved problems on calculus, algebra, and geometry with a steady flow, his focus sharpened to a razor's edge. The pressure was still there, but it had shifted. It wasn't the overwhelming pressure of failure, it was the pressure of excellence. He had to give his best. But just as he was settling into his groove, the final problem popped up on the screen. Problem 5. A train leaves City A heading towards City B at 80 miles per hour. Another train leaves City B heading towards City A at 100 miles per hour. If the distance between the two cities is 540 miles, at what time will the two trains meet? It was a word problem, something that usually took him a little longer to process. Ethan frowned, chewing on the words. He liked problems with clear steps, with numbers that lined up neatly. Word problems always felt more like puzzles to him, requiring a bit more effort to untangle. He scanned the problem again, noting the key numbers: 80 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour, 540 miles between the cities. But the question wasn't about how fast the trains were moving, it was about when they would meet. Ethan knew this would require some basic rate-time distance calculations, but the trick was working out the combined rates of the two trains. He grabbed his pen and started writing down the equation that would help him solve it. Let x be the time it takes for the trains to meet. For the first train, 80x equals distance traveled by the first train. For the second train, 100x equals distance traveled by the second train. The total distance between them was 540 miles, so the equation became 80x plus 100x equals 540. Ethan's mind whirred as he solved for x, his hands moving quickly across the page. It was simple algebra, but even with his usual confidence, his heart raced as the seconds ticked away. He reached the solution. X equals 2.4 hours. It wasn't perfect. He knew that. The numbers didn't look as neat as some of the other problems he had solved. But it was the answer, and the more he stared at it, the more he felt certain that it was correct. The trains would meet in 2.4 hours, exactly 2 hours and 24 minutes. He submitted the answer and leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He didn't have time to dwell on the result, though. There were still more problems to solve, and the clock was ticking. Ethan forced himself to push past any doubt and keep moving forward. He wasn't finished yet. As the last minutes of the competition ticked away, Ethan found himself in a zone that was almost meditative. He was no longer aware of the other students around him or the fact that his hands were shaking from the pressure. All that mattered was the next equation, the next solution. The next step. Finally, the timer buzzed, signaling the end of the competition. Ethan sat back in his chair, his chest tight, his head full of equations. He felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. It was over. He had done everything he could. He stood up slowly, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through him as he walked toward the front of the room. As he passed the other students, he noticed a few glances, some whispers, but nothing that fazed him. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what they thought. He had just competed in the toughest math competition of his life, and he had done it with everything he had. Langston caught his eye from across the room and gave him a quick nod, a silent acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. Ethan's heart swelled, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. As the students filed out of the competition hall, Ethan didn't hurry. He wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. The tension had lifted, but it had been replaced with something else, a quiet confidence. He had faced his doubts. He had pushed himself further than he ever thought possible. And now, all he could do was wait for the results. The days that followed the competition felt like a blur. The adrenaline that had fueled Ethan through the exam gradually began to wear off, leaving him with an exhaustion he hadn't expected. It was like his mind had been on overdrive for weeks, and now that the competition was over, the crash was inevitable. But there was something else, something more profound, that lingered in his mind. He had done it. He had faced the challenge and survived. Now, he had to wait. And the waiting was the hardest part. The next week at school, Ethan went through the motions. His usual routine of waking up early, getting his dad's coffee ready, and heading to school didn't change. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt like the quiet, overlooked kid in the back of the classroom. He felt different. He felt capable, like he was finally living up to his potential. However, the sense of pride that came with his personal growth didn't completely wash away the nerves gnawing at him. Every time he walked past Langston in the hallway, he couldn't help but wonder, had he done enough to make an impression? Was he going to walk away from this competition with something that could change his future? That Friday afternoon, a week after the competition, Ethan found himself at lunch, sitting with Jasmine and a couple of other classmates. They were chatting about their weekend plans, but Ethan's mind wasn't in the conversation. His gaze drifted to the back of the cafeteria, where Langston was standing with a small group of teachers, speaking quietly. "You okay, Ethan?" Jasmine's voice broke through his thoughts, and he blinked, realizing he hadn't answered her. "Huh? Oh, yeah, sorry," he said, forcing a smile. "Just waiting for the results." Jasmine gave him a sideways look. "You've been talking about this for weeks. You're going to crush it. I know you are." Ethan's smile was a little more genuine this time. He appreciated her encouragement, but there was still a lingering doubt that wouldn't let go. That afternoon, after school, Ethan was walking out of the building when he saw Langston standing by the door, a small envelope in his hand. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Langston noticed him immediately. "Carter," he said with a small but knowing smile. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you?" Ethan nodded, suddenly nervous. "Yeah, I have." Langston motioned for him to come over. "Well, the wait is over." Ethan walked over slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Langston handed him the envelope. "Go ahead, open it." With a deep breath, Ethan tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with his name at the top. He unfolded it, his hands shaking just slightly, and scanned the text. "Dear Ethan Carter. We are pleased to inform you that you have placed first in the regional math competition. Your performance was exemplary, and we are proud to offer you a scholarship to attend the prestigious Apex Academy for Advanced Mathematics. Please see the attached details regarding your scholarship package and next steps. Congratulations, Ethan. Best regards. The Math Competition Committee." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. He stared at the letter, blinking as if the words were swimming in front of his eyes. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. He had done it. He had won. Langston was smiling now, clearly proud of him. "I knew you had it in you, Ethan. I could see it the moment you walked into my class." Ethan shook his head, still in disbelief. I won." Langston laughed, a deep, rich sound. "You did. And not only that, you earned a full scholarship to one of the best schools for math in the country. This is a huge opportunity, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Ethan stood there for a moment, the world around him slowing down. It felt like the weight of the entire world had been lifted from his shoulders. His mind raced, thinking about everything this meant. A scholarship. Apex Academy. A future he had never even dared to imagine. It was all real now. Then, in the middle of his days, his father's face flashed in his mind. How would Dad react? Ethan's father had worked tirelessly his whole life, and despite everything, he had always supported Ethan's dreams. He had sacrificed so much just to keep their family afloat. This was it. This was the moment that could change their lives forever. "I'm going to call my dad," Ethan said, his voice a little breathless. Langston nodded and patted him on the back. "Go ahead. I'll give you some space." Ethan stepped outside, his hand still trembling as he dialed his father's number. The phone rang twice before his father picked up. "Hey, Dad," Ethan said, his voice wavering. "You got a minute?" "Of course, son. What's going on?" His dad's voice came through, steady and warm as always. Ethan took a deep breath, a grin spreading across his face. "I did it, Dad. I won the competition. I got the scholarship. I'm going to Apex Academy. They want me there, and they're covering everything." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a split second, Ethan's heart dropped. Had he heard him? But then his father spoke, and Ethan could hear the emotion in his voice. "Ethan. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you had something special inside of you. This is your moment, son. You've earned it." A lump formed in Ethan's throat, and he had to swallow hard. He had imagined this moment so many times, dreamed of telling his dad that he was going to make it, that he was going to be someone. But hearing his dad's voice crack with pride made everything feel even more real. "I'm going to make sure this is just the beginning, Dad," Ethan said, his voice stronger now. "This is just the first step." Ethan hung up the phone, his heart still racing, but the nerves were gone. He had done it. He had stepped out of the shadows and into something bigger than he ever imagined. And the road ahead of him, as daunting as it seemed, felt more like an opportunity than a challenge. As he walked back toward the school building, he realized something that he hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just about the competition. This was about believing in himself when no one else did. It was about proving that no matter where you came from, no matter the obstacles, you could still reach for something greater. The morning after Ethan received the scholarship letter felt surreal. It was like waking up from a dream, only to realize the dream was now his reality. The events of the previous day still echoed in his mind, but today was different. Today, the future seemed wide open, brimming with possibility. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, the scholarship letter lying next to him on the nightstand. He picked it up again, reading the words as if doing so would somehow make them feel more real. Full scholarship to Apex Academy for Advanced Mathematics. It still felt impossible. But it wasn't. His phone buzzed with a message from Jasmine. "I can't believe it. You really did it." Face screaming in fear. Ethan smiled, typing back quickly. "I'm still in shock. It feels like a dream. Thank you for believing in me." The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Langston. "Congrats, Ethan. This is only the beginning. Keep pushing yourself. Apex will be an amazing opportunity for you." Ethan stared at the message for a moment, thinking about Langston's words. He had believed in Ethan from the very start, even when Ethan wasn't sure he believed in himself. He had trusted Ethan's potential in a way that no one else had. Ethan owed him a lot. As the hours passed, Ethan's mind wandered to his family. His dad had been so proud, and even though he'd always been a quiet, supportive figure in his life, Ethan knew that this scholarship was a turning point for them both. The weight of the sacrifice his dad had carried for years, working long hours, struggling to keep their lives together, had never been more apparent. This was the break they needed. This was the chance to move beyond the struggles of the past and into something better. The phone rang, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. He looked at the screen and saw his dad's name. He quickly answered. "Hey, Dad. Hey, son. I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You've earned this. You've worked hard for it." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, and he swallowed hard before speaking. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without your support. You've always been the one doing the work, Ethan. I'm just glad to see you getting the recognition you deserve." Ethan smiled. He could hear the pride in his dad's voice. "I'm going to make the most of this, Dad. I won't let you down. I know you won't. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it when you get there. Apex Academy. Can you believe it?" "No, not yet," Ethan said, laughing softly. "But it's happening." As the days passed, Ethan started preparing for the next chapter of his life. There were forms to fill out, orientations to attend, and countless details to sort out before he would head off to Apex Academy. He wasn't just going to another school, he was embarking on a whole new adventure. And while he was excited, the reality of it all also hit him with a new kind of pressure. Apex Academy was one of the most prestigious institutions for mathematics in the country. The best students in the world went there. Ethan had won this scholarship, but now he had to prove that he belonged. He had to show that he wasn't just lucky. He had to show that he had the drive, the intellect, and the heart to succeed. His first day of orientation arrived, and the nerves hit him like a wave. As he walked through the gates of Apex Academy, he could feel his heart racing. The campus was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, modern buildings surrounded by sprawling green lawns. The kind of place that looked like it belonged to the future. As Ethan looked around, he felt small, out of place, almost. The other students walking by looked so polished, so confident. Many of them were talking to each other, laughing and smiling. He caught snippets of conversations, talks about summer vacations in Europe, private tutors, and internships at tech companies. The world of Apex Academy felt worlds away from his own. But Ethan pushed those thoughts aside. He couldn't let himself fall into comparison. He was here for a reason. He had earned this spot. He belonged here as much as anyone else. Inside, the orientation was a blur of names and faces, introductions, and speeches about the Academy's long history of excellence. Ethan sat quietly, taking in everything around him, nodding along as the headmaster spoke about the Academy's traditions and expectations. He noticed how different the atmosphere was here compared to his high school. Everyone seemed so driven, so focused. At lunch, Ethan sat by himself at first, eating quickly as he watched the other students interact. He didn't want to feel awkward, but he did. The buzz of conversation around him felt distant. He wasn't sure where he fit in yet. Then, unexpectedly, a voice broke through his thoughts. "Hey, you're Ethan, right?" Ethan looked up, startled. A tall boy with dark hair and glasses was standing next to him, smiling warmly. His clothes were neat, and he had an air of quiet confidence about him. "Yeah, that's me," Ethan said, sitting up a little straighter. "I'm Max. I saw you in the math competition last week. You did awesome." Max sat down across from Ethan, unbothered by the fact that they didn't know each other. "I didn't get to meet you then, but I thought I'd introduce myself." Ethan felt a smile tug at his lips. "Thanks, man. I didn't know there were other people from the competition here." "There are a few of us," Max said, shrugging. "But honestly, most of us are just here because we love math. It's nice to meet someone who's not just about the numbers but about the challenge." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Max grinned. "Well, I've been to schools where everyone's about the grades, you know. About competing with each other. But it's different here. It's about pushing yourself. The math is just a way of seeing how far you can go. You get what I mean?" Ethan thought about that for a moment. He liked the way Max phrased it. Pushing yourself. That was what he'd been doing all along. No matter what anyone else thought, he had always pushed himself to do better, to do more. "I get it," Ethan said, feeling a new sense of clarity. As the weeks went on, Ethan began to find his rhythm at Apex. Max turned out to be a great study partner, someone who wasn't just focused on getting the highest score but on truly understanding the material. They spent hours working together, challenging each other, and growing as mathematicians. But it wasn't just the academics that stood out. It was the way Ethan was starting to feel like he belonged here. The other students had their own stories, their own struggles. Some had rich backgrounds, but others, like Ethan, came from humble beginnings. And all of them shared the same drive to succeed. For the first time, Ethan realized that success wasn't just about winning, it was about the journey, the growth, and the people you met along the way. He was no longer just the kid who had won a math competition. He was someone who was carving out a future for himself, one equation at a time. The first few weeks at Apex Academy were a whirlwind. Ethan's life was no longer just about the day-to-day routines of school. Instead, he was immersed in a world where every class, every conversation, and every challenge felt monumental. He was surrounded by brilliant minds, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, he began to thrive. Each new problem, each new equation, felt like a puzzle he was eager to solve. But as much as he loved the intellectual challenges, something else had begun to gnaw at him. It wasn't about the math anymore. It was the pressure. Ethan had always been the quiet kid, the one who did well in school but was often overlooked. Now, at Apex, he was surrounded by students who had been groomed for greatness their entire lives. Some of them had private tutors, others came from prestigious families, and many had been part of elite programs since they were young. They were all used to being at the top. They had lived in an environment where competition was a way of life. For the first time, Ethan felt like an outsider. It was a Thursday afternoon when it hit him. Ethan had just finished an advanced calculus problem set, something that had taken him longer than he cared to admit. As he walked out of the classroom, exhausted but satisfied, he bumped into a few of his classmates, including one of the brightest students in the academy, Olivia. Olivia was sharp, confident, and effortlessly brilliant. She'd been at Apex for 2 years already, having transferred from another prestigious math school. She was the kind of student who made even the most complex topics seem like second nature. Ethan admired her, but at that moment, he felt an uncomfortable sense of inferiority creeping in. "Hey, Ethan, you good?" Olivia asked, her tone casual but laced with genuine curiosity. Ethan smiled, though it felt a little forced. "Yeah, just finishing up that problem set. It was harder than I thought." "I know what you mean," Olivia said with a slight shrug. "But it's good practice. You're doing great." Ethan nodded, though part of him couldn't help but compare himself to her. Olivia was so sure of herself. She breezed through the work, effortlessly understanding concepts that took Ethan hours to fully grasp. "Thanks," he replied, forcing a smile. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I'm just getting by, you know. Like I'm not really catching up." Olivia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to come off as insecure, but he had to admit it out loud. "I mean, everyone here has been doing this kind of stuff for years. Some of them have tutors, some have had this kind of education since they were kids. It's hard to keep up." Olivia's expression softened. "I get it. It's tough. But you've got something they don't." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Your drive. The fact that you're here proves you've got the grit, the work ethic. Yeah, it might take longer for you to get something. But that's the beauty of it, you'll understand it deeper than they do." Ethan paused, considering her words. There was something comforting in what she said. Maybe he wasn't as far behind as he thought. Maybe the fact that it took him longer wasn't a weakness, it was part of his strength. He just had to trust the process, trust himself. The next few weeks were pivotal for Ethan. He began to embrace the challenges instead of shying away from them. Instead of being intimidated by how easily others seemed to grasp the material, he focused on improving his own understanding. He spent late nights in the library, poring over textbooks, solving problems that seemed insurmountable just days ago. Each time he overcame a barrier, no matter how small, it felt like a victory. Max continued to be a steady presence in his life. Their study sessions became a regular thing, and over time, their bond strengthened. Max was never judgmental about Ethan's struggles. Instead, he encouraged him to push further, think outside the box, and never settle for good enough. It was during one of these late-night study sessions that Ethan had his breakthrough. They were working on a particularly complex proof involving advanced calculus, one that had been plaguing them both for hours. Max was sketching out some notes on a whiteboard while Ethan tried to make sense of a particularly difficult equation in his head. "Maybe we're overcomplicating it," Ethan muttered to himself. Max, who had been scribbling down the solution, glanced over. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like there's something simple we're missing. Something obvious." Max leaned back, considering the thought. What if the answer's right in front of us? We've been treating this like it's a huge problem. But maybe it's a smaller concept we need to focus on." They worked through the problem again, this time approaching it from a different angle. As Ethan looked at the numbers, something clicked. The solution that had been elusive suddenly made sense. It wasn't some complicated trick. It was basic, foundational principles applied in a new way. "That's it!" Ethan exclaimed, his heart racing. "We were overthinking it. It's just a matter of simplifying the equation." Max's eyes widened in surprise. "I knew it. You got it, man." Ethan felt a rush of excitement, the kind he hadn't experienced in a while. For the first time at Apex, he realized something important. It wasn't about being the smartest person in the room. It was about perseverance. About looking at the same problem from different perspectives until it finally clicked. The next day, Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. He was no longer the kid who doubted his place at Apex. He was starting to understand that everyone was on their own journey. And for some, that journey was filled with bumps, detours, and struggles. But the key was never giving up. That afternoon, as he walked down the hall to his next class, Olivia caught up with him. "Hey, Ethan, how's it going?" she asked with a friendly smile. "I actually solved that problem we were struggling with," he said, grinning. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's awesome." "Yeah, it wasn't as hard as we thought," Ethan said. "I just needed to simplify the equation a bit." It felt like a huge breakthrough. Olivia nodded, clearly impressed. "That's awesome. I can tell you're getting better every day." Ethan grinned wider. "Thanks, Olivia. I'm starting to realize that the process is more important than the destination." "I like that," she said, her smile warm. "You're on the right track." As Ethan continued his journey at Apex, he started to see the value in the struggle. The road less traveled was never going to be easy, but it was always going to be worth it. The challenges he faced at Apex, whether they were academic or emotional, were shaping him into someone stronger, someone more capable. And he knew that if he kept pushing forward, if he kept embracing the journey rather than focusing on the destination, there was no limit to what he could achieve. Ethan had settled into a new rhythm at Apex Academy, but with that comfort came a new set of challenges. The coursework was intense, the pressure mounting with every passing day. The students around him were still brilliant, many had an ease with the material that Ethan could only dream of, but he had stopped feeling like an outsider. For the first time, he was becoming comfortable with the idea that this was his place, a place where he could push himself and grow. But no matter how comfortable Ethan had gotten, he could never shake the feeling that the academy was not just testing his intellect, it was testing his character. There was a sharp edge to the competition at Apex, one that was more about the race to the top than the pursuit of knowledge. One afternoon, that edge revealed itself. Ethan was walking down the hallway after his latest lecture on number theory when he spotted a group of students gathered around one of the bulletin boards. The group was laughing, whispering in excitement, and there was an unmistakable tension in the air. He hadn't seen this kind of energy in a while, and something about it intrigued him. Curious, he made his way toward the group. As he got closer, he realized they were all looking at the announcement on the bulletin board. It was about the upcoming Apex Invitational, a prestigious math competition that had been held annually for years. The winners would not only earn a significant scholarship but also gain recognition from top universities around the world. For any student at Apex, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. A few of the students, including Max and Olivia, were part of the group. Max saw Ethan and waved him over. "Hey, man. You seen this?" Max asked, his voice filled with excitement. "It's the Apex Invitational. You should totally sign up." Ethan glanced at the paper, his heart skipping a beat. His mind raced with the implications. The competition would require him to push his limits even further, to compete against the brightest minds in the country. He had no doubt that it would be a monumental challenge, but it also seemed like an opportunity he couldn't pass up. He looked at Max, a little unsure. "I don't know, man. I've never competed in something like this before. What if I'm not good enough?" Max laughed, slapping him on the back. "Good enough? Ethan, you've got this. You're already outpacing most of us here. Besides, it's not just about winning. It's about pushing yourself. You know you'll regret it if you don't at least try." Ethan hesitated, glancing over at Olivia, who was standing nearby, quietly observing the conversation. Olivia, who had become one of his closest friends at Apex, stepped forward with a reassuring smile. "Max is right," she said. "You won't know unless you try. We're all in this together. And besides, I've seen your work ethic. If anyone can do it, it's you." The words resonated with Ethan, and after a moment of contemplation, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it. I'm in." The group cheered, excited to have Ethan on board. As they discussed the details of the competition, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. This was a big step for him. It was a chance to prove to himself that he truly belonged at Apex, not just as a student, but as a contender. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. Ethan threw himself into his studies, dedicating every free moment to refining his math skills. The competition was unlike anything he had experienced before. Each practice session was grueling. He studied new algorithms, learned advanced proofs, and worked on problem sets that seemed designed to break him. There were times when he thought he wouldn't be able to keep up, times when he wanted to throw in the towel. But each time, he reminded himself of why he was doing this, not to be the best, but to be the best version of himself. Max and Olivia were right there with him, offering support and encouragement when things got tough. Max's easygoing attitude balanced Ethan's more serious approach, while Olivia's quiet determination pushed them all to stay focused. The night before the competition, Ethan sat alone in his dorm room, staring at the papers spread out before him. The weight of the next day's challenge pressed down on him, but as he thought about how far he had come, a sense of calm washed over him. He had already won, in a way. Getting to this point, pushing himself beyond his comfort zone, that was the real victory. The day of the Apex Invitational arrived, and the atmosphere at the academy was electric. Students filled the hallways, buzzing with nervous energy. Ethan stood in line with Max and Olivia, each of them wearing their team's matching jackets. They had all put in countless hours of preparation, but now, the time had come to prove themselves. "Are you ready?" Olivia asked, her voice steady but with an edge of excitement. Ethan smiled. "I think so." "Good," Max said. "Let's do this." As the competition began, Ethan threw himself into the problems. The pressure was immense, and each problem seemed harder than the last. But instead of getting overwhelmed, Ethan focused on the task at hand, breaking each problem down into manageable steps. He realized that all the preparation had paid off. He wasn't just relying on his knowledge anymore, he was learning to trust his instincts, to think creatively when the answers weren't obvious. But halfway through the competition, disaster struck. Ethan had just solved one particularly challenging problem and was moving on to the next when he noticed something that made his heart drop: someone was cheating. It was a subtle thing, at first. One of the students from a rival team had glanced over at his paper and then quickly averted their eyes. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had seen the exact same student earlier in the hallway, bragging to his friends about how he was going to win. He was arrogant, overconfident, and seemed willing to do whatever it took to win. Ethan felt a rush of anger. He knew that this was a big competition, but cheating. It wasn't just unfair, it was dishonest. Ethan's mind raced. What should he do? Report it? Confront the student? The rules were clear: cheating would disqualify a person immediately, but the risk of making a false accusation weighed heavily on him. Ethan paused for a moment, grappling with his own sense of morality. He wasn't sure what to do. He could focus on his own work and ignore it, or he could speak up and risk disrupting the entire competition. His thoughts were interrupted when Max leaned over, whispering, "Hey, I saw what happened too. What should we do?" Olivia joined in, her face calm but determined. "We do the right thing. No one here is above the rules." Ethan nodded. For a moment, it felt like everything was on the line: his chance to win, his standing at the academy, his integrity. But in the end, he knew the right choice. He stood up, walked over to one of the supervisors, and quietly reported what he had seen. It was a tense few minutes before the supervisor returned with the results. The cheater had been disqualified, and the competition continued. As Ethan sat back down, Max and Olivia gave him approving looks. He had done the right thing, even when it was difficult. But what surprised him most was how much his actions had reinforced his own sense of character. He had stood up for what was right, even if it meant giving up the possibility of winning. And when the results were announced at the end of the day, Ethan didn't care about the prizes or the recognition. The real victory was knowing that he had maintained his integrity and his sense of self, even in the face of intense pressure. In the weeks following the Apex Invitational, Ethan felt a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. While his decision to report the cheater had felt right in the moment, it hadn't come without consequences. The cheater had been disqualified, and though it was clear that justice had been served, the atmosphere at the academy had changed. Some students, especially those who were close to the disqualified competitor, began to treat Ethan differently. There were whispers in the hallways, sidelong glances, and cold shoulders. Max had warned him about the potential fallout. People don't like when you shake things up. They're not used to seeing someone do the right thing, even if it costs them. But that didn't make it any easier. The isolation was palpable. Ethan found himself walking through the halls, aware of the silent judgment that seemed to hang in the air. Olivia noticed it too, but she remained unwavering in her support, her confidence in Ethan never faltering. The real kicker came when the results from the competition were posted. Ethan had performed admirably, far better than he had expected, but not well enough to secure a top spot. The first place prize had gone to another student, and while Ethan wasn't upset about losing, he couldn't help but feel disappointed in himself. He had worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and yet it felt like it wasn't enough. After all, wasn't that the way things worked at Apex? Success was reserved for the few who played by the unspoken rules of the academy. There was an invisible line that separated the winners from the rest, and Ethan, despite his dedication, had just barely missed the cut. "Don't let it get to you," Olivia said one afternoon, as they sat in the student lounge after the results had been announced. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see the concern in her eyes. Ethan stared at his hands, feeling the weight of the words. I don't know if I belong here. Everyone seems so perfect, like they've got everything figured out. And then there's me. Just trying to keep up." "You're not just trying to keep up, Ethan," Olivia replied firmly. "You're keeping up. You're doing more than most people ever will." "But it's not enough," he murmured. "Not at this place. Not when you're constantly surrounded by people who are better than you." Olivia didn't say anything for a moment, letting the silence settle between them. Then, she spoke again, softer this time. "You're comparing yourself to the wrong people." Ethan looked up, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "You're comparing yourself to the people who've been doing this for years. But you're not them. You're you. You've got your own journey, your own path. And trust me, it's way more impressive than any of them realize." Ethan smiled weakly, grateful for her words but still unsure. Deep down, he knew she was right. But the fear of not measuring up, of never being enough, haunted him in ways he couldn't easily shake. The following week, Ethan's routine became a blur. He spent most of his time in the library, trying to bury himself in coursework. Every time he felt a spark of self-doubt, he worked harder, pushed further, convinced himself that the only way to silence the doubts was through achievement. He needed to prove himself, not just to others but to himself. Max, who had been trying to reach Ethan for days, finally caught up with him in the library one afternoon. "Dude," Max said, pulling up a chair beside Ethan. "You've been avoiding me. What's going on?" Ethan didn't look up from the textbook in front of him. "Nothing. Just trying to keep up with the work. I've got a lot on my plate right now." Max eyed him for a long moment, sensing something was off. "That's not it, though, is it? You're not just trying to catch up with schoolwork, man. You're running away from something. What is it?" Ethan sighed and finally put the book down. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know, Max. I just feel like I'm never going to be good enough. Like I've hit a wall, and no matter how hard I try, it's not going to change." Max's expression softened, and he leaned in closer. "Ethan, listen to me. You're doing great. But you've got to stop thinking that your worth is measured by how well you perform. We all have our own pace, our own timeline. Some people take a little longer to get there, and that's okay. But I feel like everyone else is just, better than me," Ethan admitted quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I feel like I'm always behind, always trying to catch up, and I'm just, not enough." Max gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the thing, though. You're comparing yourself to everyone else. You can't measure your progress by their standards. You've got to focus on your own journey." Ethan glanced at Max, his mind racing. "But what if my journey isn't enough? What if I'm never going to be the person everyone expects me to be?" Max's gaze became intense. "Then that's not your problem, Ethan. You're not here for them. You're here for you. And you've already shown everyone that you're capable of more than they ever thought possible. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." That night, Ethan found himself back in his dorm room, staring at the ceiling. Max's words echoed in his mind, but the self-doubt lingered. The truth was, the road ahead felt impossibly steep. Every step forward seemed like a battle, a fight to stay afloat in a sea of expectations. But as he lay there, something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the exhaustion from trying to keep up with everything, or maybe it was the realization that he didn't have to do it alone. Olivia, Max, and even the struggles he had faced had taught him something invaluable. Success wasn't just about results. It was about persistence, about being able to stand back up after each fall. Maybe he wasn't going to win every competition or be at the top of every class. But he could still build something of his own, something that wasn't based on the expectations of others. He could define his own path. Ethan sat up, determination in his eyes. The pressure hadn't gone away, but it no longer felt insurmountable. He had a choice: he could either let it crush him, or he could use it to fuel his next step forward. The next day, Ethan walked into class with his head held a little higher, his steps a little steadier. The self-doubt was still there, lurking in the corners of his mind, but he knew it didn't have to control him anymore. The road ahead was still uncertain, but now, more than ever, he was ready to walk it. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Ethan. Though he had made a conscious decision to focus more on his own journey rather than comparing himself to others, the underlying pressure at Apex Academy never quite left. It was as if the walls of the school were lined with the unspoken expectation that each student would be exceptional, constantly moving forward, never faltering. Ethan still found himself fighting the urge to keep up, to excel at everything, but he had started to realize something crucial: being perfect was not only impossible, it was unsustainable. He wasn't sure what had shifted inside of him, but the overwhelming desire to perform at the highest level no longer consumed him as much. Still, there were days when doubt crept in. On the outside, he seemed to be handling everything just fine, but internally, it was an ongoing struggle. Every now and then, he would pass by a classroom filled with students whispering about a difficult problem set or the next big exam. His peers seemed so sure of themselves, so confident that they were destined for greatness. And then there was Ethan. Quiet, diligent, trying to keep up. No matter how hard he tried to remind himself that his path was his own, the pressure was always there, lurking beneath the surface. It wasn't until a late night in the library that Ethan's internal conflict finally reached its breaking point. The evening had started out like any other. Ethan had settled into his usual corner in the back of the library, surrounded by books and notes. The flickering of the fluorescent lights above created a faint hum in the otherwise silent room. He had been working on a particularly difficult calculus problem for over an hour, but no matter how much he stared at the equation, he couldn't figure it out. The numbers blurred together, and the frustration built with every failed attempt. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the exhaustion, but it wasn't working. He had been up for days, buried in textbooks, practicing problem after problem. Every time he thought he had a breakthrough, it slipped through his fingers. His mind was becoming foggy, and the pressure he had been suppressing for weeks began to rise again. "Why can't I get this?" he muttered under his breath, pushing the notebook away from him in frustration. Ethan's head was spinning. He glanced around the library, at the students who seemed to glide through their work effortlessly, and his frustration bubbled over. It wasn't just the calculus problem, it was everything. The expectations. The competition. The constant need to perform. In that moment, it felt like the weight of all his insecurities and fears had finally come crashing down. It was then that he noticed someone walking toward him from the aisle across the room. Olivia. She was holding a few textbooks under one arm, her eyes scanning the library as she approached. She stopped beside his table, looking down at him with a soft smile. "Hey," she said quietly. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan blinked, surprised to see her. "I thought you were studying for your chemistry exam." "I was," she said, settling down across from him. "But I saw you over here looking like you could use a break." Ethan tried to muster a smile, but it felt forced. "I don't think I need a break. I just can't figure this out," he said, gesturing to the notebook. "I've been stuck on this problem for over an hour, and I can't seem to make sense of it." Olivia didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat back, her eyes scanning the page of numbers in front of Ethan. He watched her, feeling a pang of guilt. Why couldn't he be as effortlessly brilliant as she was? Olivia seemed to excel at everything she did, math, science, even socializing. It was like she had it all figured out. "I know it's frustrating," she said at last, her voice steady. "But you don't need to have it all figured out right now, Ethan." Ethan stared at her, the words feeling foreign. "What do you mean?" "You're always putting so much pressure on yourself to be perfect," Olivia said, her eyes meeting his. "It's like you think you have to be the best at everything, all the time. But that's not how life works. No one is perfect. And no one, no matter how good they seem, has it all together all the time." Ethan's throat tightened. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to tell her that he couldn't afford to fail, that failure was the one thing that terrified him most. But instead, he found himself opening up in a way he hadn't before. "I feel like I'm falling behind," he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone here is so smart, so confident. I feel like I'm just pretending. Like I don't belong here." Olivia's face softened. She placed her hand on his across the table. "Ethan, you belong here because of who you are, not because of how fast you solve equations or how high you score on tests. You're here because you've got something real, something that most people don't. You've got heart." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Heart?" "Yeah," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You care about what you do. You're willing to work harder than anyone else. That's why you're here. Not because you're some genius who can solve problems in seconds. But because you don't give up, even when it's hard." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach loosen, but he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was still letting everyone down. "But what if I fail?" Olivia squeezed his hand, a small smile on her lips. "Then you get back up and try again. Failure isn't the end. It's just another part of the process." Ethan took a deep breath, her words sinking in. Maybe he had been too focused on what he couldn't do, on the things that he struggled with. He had let the fear of failure define him, and in doing so, he had missed the point entirely. "You're right," he said finally, his voice more certain. "I can't keep measuring myself by everyone else's standards. I have to do this for me, not for anyone else." Olivia smiled at him, a mixture of relief and pride in her eyes. "Exactly. You've got this, Ethan." The next morning, Ethan returned to his studies with a newfound sense of purpose. It wasn't that the pressure had disappeared entirely, it was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but it no longer had the same grip on him. He had made peace with the idea that success didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be his. As he sat down to tackle the calculus problem once more, his approach had changed. This time, instead of obsessing over the exact solution, he focused on the process. The problem no longer seemed like an insurmountable mountain to climb, but a series of smaller steps he could take, one at a time. For the first time in a while, Ethan felt something click inside him. The pressure wasn't gone, but the fear of failure had lost its hold. He wasn't just trying to prove something to others. He was proving something to himself. And that, he realized, was all that truly mattered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following weeks felt like a transformation for Ethan. He'd finally begun to accept that failure wasn't something to fear, but a necessary part of the journey. His approach to school, to life, and even to his relationships was changing. There was a quiet confidence in his steps, a sense that he didn't need to be perfect, only persistent. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, a mystery that had been nagging at him since the day of the Apex Invitational. It wasn't the competition itself, or the fact that he hadn't placed as high as he'd hoped. It was something else. Something unsettling. When he had walked out of the arena that day, something had felt off. The way the disqualified student, a guy named Josh Williams, had reacted to his failure didn't sit right with Ethan. Josh had been angry, yes, but there had been something more to it. A sort of coldness, a disconnection in his eyes, as if he wasn't just upset about losing. It was as if he had already known what was going to happen. Ethan had brushed it off at first, thinking it was just his own nerves, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized he was onto something. There had been rumors circulating the academy about Josh's connections, whispers that he had been involved in some shady dealings in the past. And as much as Ethan wanted to ignore the whispers, he couldn't. Something about Josh's demeanor after the disqualification, the way he had looked at Ethan with an almost calculating gaze, felt too deliberate to be a simple emotional reaction. It was during one of their study sessions in the library that Ethan brought it up to Olivia. "Olivia, I've been thinking about something," Ethan said, looking up from his calculus book. Olivia, who had been quietly working on her notes, paused and looked at him. "What's up?" "It's about Josh Williams," Ethan said, lowering his voice as though the name itself was a secret. "Something about the way he reacted to getting disqualified doesn't sit right with me." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? I thought you said he was just mad about losing." Ethan shook his head. "I thought that too, at first. But now that I've been thinking about it more, I feel like there's something more going on. I don't think he was just mad. It's almost like he knew it was going to happen." Olivia frowned, sensing the weight in his voice. "Are you saying he planned to cheat?" "I don't know," Ethan said, his voice low. "But I'm starting to think that maybe there's more to this than we realized. I mean, everyone thought the competition was fair, right? But what if Josh had some kind of advantage that we didn't know about?" Olivia's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "So, what are you saying? You think there was more going on with Josh than just a bad move during the competition?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe. I don't know. But there's something about his behavior that makes me think he wasn't just reacting to his loss. It's like he had an agenda." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The possibility of something darker going on at the school seemed too far-fetched to believe. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something that needed to be uncovered. He could feel it deep down in his gut. "You know, Ethan," Olivia said finally, her voice measured, "if there's something more to this, we should be careful. It's one thing to suspect someone of cheating, but it's another thing to get involved in something that might be bigger than you realize. Apex is, well, it's not exactly a place where you want to stir up trouble." Ethan met her gaze. "I know. But I can't just ignore it. If there's something going on, I need to know. We need to know." Olivia hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. But we're doing this carefully. No running off into something we're not prepared for." The next few days were a blur of quiet investigation. Ethan and Olivia didn't tell anyone else about their suspicions. They kept to themselves, paying close attention to anything that might point to a bigger picture. They started looking into Josh Williams' background, trying to find anything that could explain his odd behavior. It wasn't long before they stumbled across something intriguing. While researching through the student records, they found out that Josh's family had connections to several prominent figures in the tech industry. His father was a major player in one of the largest software companies in the country, and his mother had been involved in several high-profile business ventures. On the surface, it seemed like an ordinary story of privilege, but as Ethan dug deeper, he found something strange. Josh's name had been mentioned in a series of anonymous messages on a school forum about a year ago. The messages were cryptic, referencing a strategic advantage that Josh might have been using to get ahead in school. The messages didn't say much, but they raised enough red flags to keep Ethan and Olivia curious. Could Josh's connections have given him access to resources that allowed him to cheat? Or was there something even more complicated going on? One evening, after hours of scouring the school's old online forum, Olivia found a clue that made her freeze. She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the screen intently. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to see this." Ethan walked over to her side and looked at the screen. Olivia had pulled up a post that had been made months ago, a message that had been largely ignored by everyone at the time. The text was simple, but chilling. "Josh Williams doesn't play by the rules. He's got connections. Be careful who you trust." There was no name attached to the post, just the anonymous warning. But the implications were clear. Someone had been warning others about Josh for a reason. And now Ethan felt a deep sense of unease settle in his stomach. What if Josh had been using his connections for more than just academic success? What if he had been using them to manipulate the entire competition? The realization hit Ethan hard. This wasn't just about a cheating scandal anymore. This was something much bigger, and if they weren't careful, they might be stepping into something they wouldn't be able to get out of. The next day, as Ethan and Olivia walked through the school corridors, the weight of their discovery hung over them. They both knew that they couldn't let this go, there was too much at stake. But at the same time, they knew they had to be cautious. The truth they were uncovering was far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Ethan looked at Olivia, his mind racing with possibilities. "We need to get to the bottom of this. We can't back down now." Olivia nodded, her face set in determination. "But we do this carefully. We don't want to get in over our heads." As they continued to walk, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to open a door that would lead them to a world of secrets they weren't prepared for. But one thing was clear, they weren't going to stop until they uncovered the truth, no matter where it led. The discovery they'd made in the school's online forum had sent ripples through Ethan's mind. The more he thought about it, the more questions kept popping up. Could Josh really be playing a game with rules no one else could see? And if so, what other secrets were hidden beneath the surface of Apex Academy? He had to know the truth. But now that he had opened this door, he realized how dangerous this could get. The next morning, Ethan met Olivia in their usual spot, the back corner of the library. The fluorescent lights above flickered sporadically, casting a faint hum in the otherwise quiet space. They had spent hours digging into Josh Williams' background, but something still didn't feel right. It wasn't just about what they had uncovered so far, it was the nagging feeling that they were missing something important, something crucial that would connect all the dots. Ethan sat down across from Olivia, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his notebook. "I keep going over everything we found. The anonymous post, the rumors about Josh's family, his connections. It all fits. But there's still something we're overlooking." Olivia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, clearly deep in thought. "It's almost like we're looking at the symptoms of a much larger problem, but we haven't pinpointed the disease yet." Ethan frowned. "Yeah, like we're seeing the surface of something, but we don't know what's really going on underneath. What if Josh is just a pawn in a bigger game?" The thought sent a shiver down his spine. If Josh really was part of something larger, something more dangerous, then they were treading into murky waters. "Well," Olivia said after a pause, "we need more evidence. We can't just keep looking at rumors and anonymous messages." If we're going to prove this, we need something concrete. Something that connects Josh to whatever this advantage is. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Okay, but how do we get that? Olivia's eyes gleamed with a sudden realization. We dig into his contacts. His family. Maybe we can find something there. If Josh is getting some kind of special treatment, his family's business connections might have some hidden ties to the school or the competition. Ethan thought for a moment. Olivia's idea was brilliant. Josh's family had always been somewhat of an enigma, but if they were involved in the tech industry, surely there had to be some traceable connections between them and Apex Academy. We'll need to be careful, though, Ethan said. If we get too close to the truth, we might end up digging ourselves into a hole we can't get out of. Olivia gave him a knowing look. You're right. But if we don't do this, no one will. And if we want to know what Josh is up to, we can't rely on anyone else. The next few days were filled with covert research. Ethan and Olivia began scouring through publicly available information about Josh's family, focusing on his father's tech company. They spent hours in the library, using every resource at their disposal to gather any leads they could find. Then, a breakthrough came one evening, when Ethan found a press release about a recent partnership between Josh's father's company and Apex Academy. It wasn't a huge deal, just a small collaboration regarding an upcoming tech fair at the school, but the timing of it raised Ethan's suspicions. The press release had been published just a few weeks before the Apex Invitational, when Josh had gotten disqualified. The thought crossed Ethan's mind, could Josh's family have used this partnership to secure an unfair advantage for him? But as they delved deeper, they uncovered something that sent an even greater shock through Ethan. Josh's father wasn't just involved in a partnership with the school. He was a major donor, one of the largest, in fact. And the more Ethan researched, the more he realized that Apex Academy had been receiving millions in donations from Josh's family's company for years. In fact, a large portion of the school's advanced STEM programs and its competition funding came from this very tech giant. The dots were starting to connect in Ethan's mind, but they were far darker than he had anticipated. Was Josh's disqualification a part of some larger scheme to manipulate the competition? Or worse, was the whole event rigged from the start? As Ethan and Olivia stared at the screen, trying to digest what they had just uncovered, the weight of their discovery became almost too much to bear. If they were right, everything they thought they knew about the school, and the competition, was a lie. Olivia, I think we're onto something huge, Ethan said, his voice shaking slightly. This isn't just about Josh anymore. This is about something bigger. I think Josh's family has been influencing Apex Academy's programs and competitions for years. Olivia's face was pale as she absorbed the information. Are you saying the competition is rigged? That it's all been bought? Ethan swallowed hard, his mind still trying to process everything. It looks that way. And if we're right, we have to be careful. We're digging into something that could get us into a lot of trouble. Olivia's gaze shifted to the computer screen, her expression hardening with determination. But if we don't expose this, who will? What if Josh isn't the only one? What if this is going on with other students? We can't let this slide. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The connections, the donations, the hidden partnerships between Josh's family and Apex Academy. It was clear that Josh had some sort of advantage, one that no one else had. And yet, Josh's arrogant attitude made it seem like he was untouchable. Ethan wondered how many other students had been unknowingly caught in the web Josh's family had spun. He wasn't sure where this would lead, but one thing was certain, they couldn't back down now. They had to uncover the truth, even if it meant going up against one of the wealthiest families in the city. But the more Ethan thought about it, the more he realized just how dangerous this could be. Josh's family wasn't just rich, they were influential. They had the power to make people disappear, to cover up anything that didn't fit into their carefully constructed world. What had started as a simple investigation into a disqualified student had now turned into something far more treacherous. The next morning, Ethan walked into school with a sense of purpose. He didn't know how long he could keep this up, but he wasn't about to back out. His suspicions about Josh had turned into something deeper, something more alarming. He had to find out what was going on, and fast. As he walked through the halls of Apex Academy, his mind raced. The school, which had once felt like a safe place to learn, now seemed like a maze filled with secrets, half-truths, and lies. But Ethan wasn't about to stop searching for the truth. And he knew that this time, he wouldn't be alone. Olivia was by his side, and together, they were going to expose the hidden forces controlling everything around them, no matter what it took. The days that followed were filled with a sense of urgency. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that every step they took brought them closer to something much bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. His mind raced with possibilities, trying to make sense of everything they had uncovered. The connections between Josh's family and Apex Academy were too vast to ignore, but the implications of it all were enough to make him wonder if they had made a mistake by digging so deep. Olivia seemed just as consumed by it all. She spent hours going over the data they had collected, analyzing every scrap of information for clues, but even she couldn't deny the growing tension. It was like they had opened a door, and beyond it lay a world they weren't prepared to navigate. And it wasn't just the mystery itself that was making Ethan uneasy. It was the fact that they were starting to notice things. Subtle changes. A strange look from a teacher here, a suspiciously quiet conversation there. It was as if someone knew what they were doing and didn't want them to find out anymore. It all came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon, just a week after their discovery. Ethan and Olivia had spent the entire day going through Josh Williams' social media profiles, trying to see if they could find any direct connection to the shady practices they suspected. They had found a few posts that hinted at the possibility of insider knowledge, but nothing concrete. Still, Ethan's gut told him that they were on the right track. They were sitting in the library when everything changed. Ethan had just clicked on a video Josh had uploaded months ago, showing off a new tech project he had been working on. The video was innocuous at first, just Josh showing off some prototype he had built, but as the video continued, Ethan noticed something that made his heart stop. In the background, barely visible, there was a document on Josh's desk. It wasn't clear at first, but as the camera panned, Ethan could make out a few words. Words that made his stomach churn. Apex Invitational Preparation. Ethan's pulse quickened. The words were written in bold letters across a file that Josh had carelessly left in plain sight during the video. The file wasn't just a random project. It was something directly related to the competition that had torn his life apart. "Olivia, look at this," Ethan said, his voice low, but filled with urgency. Olivia leaned over, eyes narrowing as she stared at the screen. It took a moment for her to spot the same document Ethan had seen, and when she did, her eyes widened in shock. "Is that," she began, but the words failed her. "It's the Apex Invitational Prep," Ethan confirmed, his voice now tinged with disbelief. "It's right there, clear as day. But why would Josh have this document? This isn't a personal project. This is the same competition that we've been investigating." "Wait a second," Olivia said, her mind clearly racing. "If that's the prep document for the invitational, then why would Josh have it? What does this mean?" Ethan's mind was spinning as the pieces started to fall into place. It was more than just an advantage, it was a carefully orchestrated plan. The thought hit him like a ton of bricks. Josh must have known how the competition would unfold. He had access to insider information, he was prepared in ways that no other participant could have been. And that document? It wasn't just a coincidence. It was proof that someone, somewhere, had rigged the system. "Olivia, this changes everything," Ethan said, his voice growing more serious. "If Josh had access to this document, then he had an unfair advantage the entire time. But it gets worse. This is evidence of manipulation. This is bigger than we thought. This isn't just about one competition, it's about the integrity of the entire school. Olivia shook her head, still trying to process what they were looking at. This is, beyond belief. But this is proof, Ethan. Proof that someone at Apex is involved in something shady. Ethan clenched his fists in frustration. But who? Who in the school would be in a position to leak that kind of information to Josh? It has to be someone high up, someone with access to the resources and the people who run the competition. We're talking about a massive cover-up here, Olivia. And it's been going on for years. Olivia bit her lip, her eyes scanning the screen as though she could somehow make the answers appear. We need to take this to someone. We can't keep this to ourselves. Ethan hesitated. We can't just tell anyone. What if Josh finds out? What if his family finds out? You saw how powerful they are, they could crush us if we go public with this. Olivia's face softened with concern. So what do we do, Ethan? Keep quiet and hope it goes away? I don't know, Ethan said, his voice shaky with uncertainty. But I can't let this go. Not now. I've spent too long fighting for a fair chance. I can't sit back and watch as people like Josh get away with this. But we have to be smart. We need a plan. Later that night, Ethan lay in his bed, the weight of everything that had happened settling in like a heavy cloud. His mind was flooded with questions, and none of them had clear answers. What was the right thing to do? Should they go public with what they had uncovered, or was it too dangerous to expose the truth? He rolled over, staring at the ceiling as he tried to make sense of it all. One thing was for sure, the stakes had never been higher. Suddenly, a ping broke the silence. Ethan picked up his phone and saw that he had received a message. It was from Olivia. Ethan, I've been thinking about it. I know we can't go public just yet, but maybe we should talk to someone who can help us, someone outside the school. We need someone who can investigate this without being compromised. Someone who can get answers. Ethan sat up, his heart racing. The idea of talking to someone outside of the school made perfect sense. But who could they trust? The wrong person could blow the whole thing wide open, or worse, tip off Josh's family. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I agree. We need to be careful, but we can't keep this a secret. Let's meet tomorrow and come up with a plan. We need to figure out who we can trust. He hit send, then put his phone down. Tomorrow, they would make a decision. Tomorrow, they would take the next step into a world that had become increasingly dangerous, and increasingly impossible to escape. The next day, Ethan and Olivia met again, as planned, in the library. The weight of their discoveries hung heavily between them, a constant reminder of the perilous road ahead. Every corner of Apex Academy now seemed to carry the scent of secrets, and each moment they spent digging felt like they were slowly sinking deeper into a tangled web they might never escape. What do you think? Olivia asked, breaking the silence as she sat across from Ethan. She had a notebook in her lap, scribbling notes furiously, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. Who can we trust? Ethan stared at the pages of his own notebook, flipping through the scribbled research and theories they had compiled over the last few days. Their investigation had turned up an overwhelming amount of evidence, but all of it still pointed to a bigger question: who could they go to with this? I've been thinking about it, Ethan said slowly, finally breaking the silence. We can't trust anyone inside the school. Not after everything we've found. Josh's family is too connected. The faculty, the administration, they might all be compromised. Olivia nodded. That's what I've been thinking too. But we need help from somewhere. Someone on the outside who isn't tied to all this. Ethan leaned back, a plan beginning to form in his mind. What if we went to someone who has no ties to the school at all, someone who could investigate this without the same risks? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Who? A journalist, Ethan said, his voice gaining confidence. Someone who's dealt with corruption and cover-ups before. We need someone who knows how to dig into powerful people and won't be intimidated. I've been thinking about someone in particular. Ethan had always been careful about what he shared with people outside his circle. He didn't want to put anyone else at risk. But there was one person he knew who had built a reputation on uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous it was. Her name was Grace Carter, and she was an investigative journalist who had exposed several high-profile cases of corruption in the city. Ethan had read her articles before. She had a knack for getting to the heart of complex issues, especially when it came to powerful people using their influence for personal gain. Grace Carter, Ethan said, looking up at Olivia. She's written about shady corporate dealings, political scandals, and school corruption in the past. If anyone can take on Josh's family and the school's cover-up, it's her. Olivia was silent for a moment, clearly weighing the options. Do you think she'll help us? Ethan wasn't sure. Reaching out to someone like Grace Carter was risky. It wasn't just about sharing their findings with a journalist, it was about trusting someone who had no reason to believe them. Would she dismiss their claims as the ramblings of a couple of overzealous teenagers? Or would she recognize the truth and be willing to help them expose it? We don't have much choice, Ethan said, determination creeping into his voice. We've hit a dead end here. If we want to get to the bottom of this, we need someone who can take this story public and bring real pressure to bear on Apex Academy. If we're right, this could be the biggest story in the city. Later that evening, Ethan sat at his computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had found Grace Carter's contact information online. Her email address was listed under her journalistic work, and he knew that reaching out to her was a long shot. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was their only option. He took a deep breath, typed out a message, and hit send. Subject: Urgent tip about possible corruption at Apex Academy. Dear Ms. Carter. My name is Ethan Clark, and I'm a student at Apex Academy. I know this might sound unusual, but I've uncovered something that I believe could be a major story. It involves corruption at the highest levels of the school, including possible manipulation of a major student competition, the Apex Invitational. I have collected evidence that suggests a powerful family is influencing the school's decisions, including insider information and rigged results. I realize that this is a bold claim, but I'm willing to share everything I've uncovered if you're interested in looking further into it. I'm also aware that this could put me and my friend in danger, so I ask that you keep this confidential for now. Please let me know if you're interested in learning more. Thank you for your time. Ethan Clark. Ethan hit send and stared at the screen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just opened a door that could not be closed. If Grace Carter responded, their lives would change forever. The next morning, Ethan woke to an email notification on his phone. He opened it without thinking, his breath catching in his throat as he read the subject line, Urgent tip about possible corruption at Apex Academy. Dear Ethan. Thank you for reaching out. I understand that this may seem like a lot to ask, but I want to assure you that I take these kinds of allegations seriously. I've dealt with similar situations before, and I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. Please respond with a time and place where we can meet in person. We can discuss everything in detail, and I will take every precaution to protect your anonymity. Best. Grace Carter. Ethan couldn't believe it. Grace Carter had responded. And she was willing to meet in person. He turned to Olivia, who was sitting beside him at breakfast, her phone in hand. Olivia, she responded. She wants to meet us. This could be our shot. Olivia's eyes widened. That's incredible. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Ethan nodded, his excitement tempered by the realization that meeting with Grace Carter would change everything. If they were right, they were about to open up a floodgate of information that could expose everything they had uncovered, and more. The stakes were higher than ever, and once they spoke to Grace, there was no turning back. Later that day, Ethan and Olivia arrived at the coffee shop where they had agreed to meet Grace. The place was quiet, tucked away in a corner of the city, far from the watchful eyes of Apex Academy's administration and the powerful families pulling the strings behind the scenes. As they sat at a corner table, waiting, Ethan's mind raced. He knew this meeting could be the turning point. They were about to hand over everything they had uncovered, and trust someone they had never met with their lives. A few minutes later, a woman in her mid-30s walked in. She was tall, with dark brown hair pulled back into a ponytail, and she exuded confidence. Grace Carter. She scanned the room before her eyes landed on Ethan and Olivia. She approached with a purposeful stride and sat down, her gaze sharp. Ethan Clark and Olivia Bennett, Grace said, her voice calm but intense. I understand you've got information that could bring down a few people. Ethan met her gaze, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment that could change everything. We've got proof, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his mind. And we need your help to expose it. Grace Carter leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning Ethan and Olivia as they sat across from her. The coffee shop was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around, but for Ethan, it felt as though every noise had been muffled by the weight of the moment. The journalist they had reached out to was now the one person who could help them unravel the dangerous secrets surrounding Apex Academy. So, tell me everything, Grace said, her voice calm but firm. Her professional demeanor radiated an air of experience. This wasn't her first time dealing with a story that could ruin powerful people. Ethan took a deep breath, glancing at Olivia, who nodded in encouragement. He knew that they were about to lay out everything they had discovered, but the stakes were so high that it made his stomach churn. We've been investigating Apex Academy's annual competition, the Apex Invitational. At first, we thought it was just a normal event, but then we started digging deeper and discovered something disturbing, Ethan began. He spoke slowly, trying to keep his nerves in check. We found evidence suggesting that the competition is rigged, that powerful families have been influencing the outcomes for years. Specifically, Josh Williams' family. Grace didn't interrupt. She simply watched them intently, her eyes not leaving their faces. Olivia leaned forward, eager to add more context. Josh's family has been involved with Apex for a long time, and they have a lot of pull. We found documents, emails, and social media posts that suggest Josh had insider information, things no one else could have known. And the most shocking thing is that this isn't just about one competition, it's about a whole network of corruption within the school itself. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest as he continued. We also found a file titled Apex Invitational Preparation, the same one Josh was shown in his own video. This document outlines the competition structure, giving him an edge over everyone else. That's not just a coincidence. It's evidence that the system is rigged. Grace nodded, digesting the information carefully. After a long pause, she leaned forward slightly. Okay, she said slowly. You've got my attention. But this is a big claim. Rigging a competition, covering up corruption, it's all risky, and it's going to take more than just some documents and screenshots to make a story that will hold up. Do you have anything more concrete? Something that links Josh's family directly to Apex's higher-ups? Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. This was the part he had been dreading. The evidence they had gathered was compelling, but he knew it wasn't enough to bring the whole story to light. They needed something stronger. They needed a smoking gun. That's what we're trying to figure out, Ethan admitted, the reality of the situation weighing on him. We don't have a direct connection between Josh's family and the school's administration, but we think the connections are there. It's just, well, we haven't found the final piece yet. Olivia spoke up, her voice steady and resolute. We're still looking for it, but we need someone like you who can get us that final piece. You're the one who can dig deeper and expose the full story. We're just students, we don't have the resources to go up against the people who run the school. But you do. Grace stared at them for a long moment, her gaze piercing. The silence was thick with tension, and for a moment, Ethan wasn't sure if she would agree to help them. But then she nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I'll help you," she said, her tone measured but determined. "But here's the deal, I'm not going to just walk in there and start demanding answers. That's not how this works. I need to go in under the radar, gather as much information as I can without drawing attention to myself. That means you two are going to have to stay involved and continue your investigation on the ground. This is going to be a slow burn, but it's the only way we're going to get the story we need." Ethan felt a surge of relief. They had crossed a major hurdle by getting Grace on board. But at the same time, a new wave of worry washed over him. This was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. "How do we even start?" Olivia asked, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Grace gave them a long, thoughtful look. "We start by getting the full picture. We need to trace the connections between the Williams family, the competition, and the people who have the power to influence the results. I'll need access to documents, internal communications, anything that can connect the dots. And I'll need your help to get that information. You have to keep digging, even if it means getting close to people who might not want you asking questions." Ethan nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes." Grace stood up and grabbed her bag. "All right, here's what I suggest. I'll begin by doing some background research on the Williams family, particularly their involvement with Apex. Meanwhile, you two can focus on getting more specific evidence, things like emails, confidential documents, anything that could provide a clear trail. We'll also need to meet regularly to discuss what we find." She paused before turning toward the door. "I'll be in touch soon. Don't do anything reckless. The closer we get to the truth, the more dangerous it becomes." Ethan and Olivia watched as Grace left the coffee shop, disappearing into the city's bustling streets. The reality of their situation began to settle in. They weren't just two students trying to expose a rigged competition anymore. They were involved in something much bigger, something that could destroy lives and reputations if they weren't careful. Over the next few days, Ethan and Olivia worked tirelessly to gather more evidence. Every conversation they had with classmates and teachers seemed to carry hidden risks. They kept their heads down, knowing that the walls were closing in around them. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every glance from a teacher, every passing student seemed to hold a secret. They were getting closer to the truth, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. He could feel the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on him, each new discovery adding to the suffocating pressure. As they sat together late one night in the library, going through emails they had managed to secure, Olivia broke the silence. "We're really doing this, aren't we? We're about to bring down the whole system." Ethan looked at her, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "Yeah. And we're doing it for the right reasons. We can't let people like Josh's family get away with this. They've been using their power to control everything, and it's time it stops." Olivia smiled slightly, though her eyes were filled with uncertainty. "Just promise me one thing, no matter how messy it gets, we stick together. We can't back down now." "I promise," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll get to the bottom of this. Together." The days following their meeting with Grace were a blur for Ethan and Olivia. Each passing moment felt like a countdown, the pressure mounting as they got deeper into the labyrinth of lies and deception that surrounded Apex Academy. What had started as a simple investigation into a rigged competition now seemed like a full-blown conspiracy involving some of the most powerful figures in the city. Despite the looming danger, Ethan felt a surge of determination whenever he thought about the final goal, exposing the truth. Every email, every document they uncovered brought them one step closer to the day when they would finally see their hard work pay off. But it also made them realize just how precarious their position was. Every step they took felt like they were walking on a razor's edge. Ethan sat at his desk that night, scanning through a series of old emails they had gathered from one of Apex's internal servers. There were countless threads that seemed innocuous at first glance, but the more they read, the more they began to notice patterns. Small clues here and there that hinted at a much larger and far more dangerous conspiracy. "What have you found?" Olivia asked, joining him at the desk, her voice laced with exhaustion. The weeks of late nights were starting to take their toll. Ethan rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the haze of fatigue that had settled over him. "I think we're getting closer," he said, his voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and unease. "Look at this, these emails from the school's finance office. They're all about donations to the school, but check out the amounts. They're all coming from organizations tied to Josh's family. And the dates? They align perfectly with the timing of the Apex Invitational." Olivia leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the screen. "So you're saying these donations might be influencing the competition?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Ethan replied. "Josh's family has been funneling money into the school, and it looks like the donations were timed to coincide with key events in the competition. This could be how they're rigging the outcomes. By controlling the flow of money, they control the decision-makers." Olivia shook her head, her face etched with disbelief. "This goes deeper than we thought. We need to get this information to Grace, but we can't just send an email. If they trace it back to us—" "I know," Ethan cut her off, his voice grim. "We have to be careful. Grace said we need to be smart about this. We can't make a move until we have all the pieces." There was a long pause as both of them sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Olivia let out a long sigh, breaking the tension. "So, what now?" "We keep digging," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We need to find the final piece. We need to prove that the donations were used not just for the competition, but to manipulate the whole system at Apex." The next day, Ethan met with Grace at a nearby cafe. Olivia had been too exhausted to come, and after their late-night research session, she had gone home to rest. Ethan wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going without burning out himself, but the thought of giving up wasn't an option. Grace was already sitting at a table when he arrived, her laptop open in front of her. She was looking through a stack of documents, probably related to the Williams family, as she had promised. "Ethan," Grace said as he sat down, looking up at him with a tired but focused expression. "I've made some progress. But we need more. What have you found?" Ethan slid his laptop across the table to her, showing her the emails they had uncovered about the donations. Grace read through them carefully, her brow furrowing as she pieced the details together. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "is a gold mine. If we can link these donations directly to the school's decisions, then we've got the story. But there's one thing we need, something that proves the money was used to influence the competition itself." Ethan nodded. "That's what we've been trying to find. We're hoping the next step will give us that evidence." Grace closed the laptop, folding her arms across her chest. "You two are on the right track. But I need you to go deeper. I want you to get into the school's records. I'm talking about their internal meetings, staff communications, anything that shows how decisions were made about the competition. If you can find anything that shows Josh's family influencing those decisions, we can blow this wide open." Ethan felt a surge of nervous energy. They had already risked so much. Getting access to the school's internal records would be incredibly dangerous, but it was the only way to prove their theory. "I'll talk to Olivia," Ethan said. "We'll figure out a way to get what we need." Grace stood up, slipping her laptop into her bag. "Good. But remember, time is running out. You don't know how far these people are willing to go to protect their secrets." Later that evening, Ethan met Olivia in the school library. They had already discussed the next phase of their investigation, accessing Apex Academy's internal records. It wasn't going to be easy, but they both knew they had no choice. They needed proof, and this was the only way to get it. "I'm thinking of going through the administrative offices tomorrow night," Ethan said, his voice low, careful not to draw attention. "The school's internal records are stored there. We'll have to find a way in without getting caught." Olivia looked uneasy. "Are you sure this is a good idea? What if someone finds out?" "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied. We've come too far to back down now. Olivia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I'm in. Let's do it. They spent the rest of the evening planning their move. It wasn't going to be easy. Apex Academy's administration was tight-knit, and there were few places in the building that were off-limits to students. They would have to be smart, quick and quiet, if they were going to get their hands on the records without leaving a trace. The next night, under the cover of darkness, Ethan and Olivia snuck into the school's administrative building. They had waited until the halls were empty, knowing that the risk of getting caught would be much higher during the day. Ethan's heart raced as they navigated the dimly lit corridors, heading toward the office where they knew the records were kept. It felt as if every creak of the floor beneath their feet was amplified, each sound reminding them of the danger they were in. Finally, they reached the office door. Ethan turned to Olivia, his expression serious. This is it. We go in, get what we need, and get out. No mistakes. Olivia nodded, her face set in determination. Let's do it. Ethan carefully inserted a lock pick into the door's handle, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He had done this a few times before, breaking into places when necessary, but it was always risky. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, they were uncovering something bigger than either of them had imagined. With a soft click, the door creaked open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched across the room. Ethan and Olivia quickly moved toward the back, where they knew the most sensitive documents were kept. They weren't sure exactly what they were looking for, but they knew that if they dug deep enough, they would find something to connect the dots between the Williams family, the school's administration, and the rigged competition. As Ethan reached for the first file, his fingers brushed against something cold, an envelope marked with the school's seal. He pulled it out, his heart racing. Inside, he found a series of internal communications between the school's administration and a list of donors, including members of the Williams family. There it was. The final piece. The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. The documents they had stolen from the school's administrative office were the smoking gun they needed, but as he sat at the kitchen table with Olivia, sorting through the papers, a growing sense of dread gnawed at him. The walls were closing in. This is it, Ethan muttered, scanning the folder he had pulled from the filing cabinet. He held up a series of documents that clearly showed the Williams family's donations to Apex Academy, along with the approval of specific individuals within the administration. They were all connected, every email, every meeting, every donation, a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure that Josh would always come out on top in the Apex Invitational. Olivia frowned, her eyes darting across the pages. It's all right here. They've been controlling the competition from the start. This isn't just about money. This is about power, manipulation, and keeping it all hidden from everyone. Ethan's heart pounded as he sifted through more of the papers. If we leak this, it could bring down the entire school system, not just the competition. These people are powerful, if they find out we have this. We'll be in danger, Olivia finished, her voice low and steady. Ethan looked up at her. We need to get this to Grace. It's time. They had waited long enough. The documents were irrefutable. But as the adrenaline started to pump through his veins, so did the fear. This was it, the point of no return. Ethan grabbed his phone and called Grace. The coffee shop was busy when Ethan and Olivia arrived, but they found Grace sitting in her usual spot, her laptop open in front of her. The tension in the air was palpable as they sat down, both of them still high on the rush of adrenaline from last night's break-in. You got it? Grace asked immediately, her voice calm but eager. Ethan pushed the folder across the table toward her. We did. Grace opened it slowly, scanning the contents with practiced eyes. She didn't say anything for a few moments, simply reading. Olivia looked at Ethan, her lips pressed tight together. It felt as though time had stopped. Finally, Grace closed the folder and looked up at them. This is huge, she said quietly. If we can prove the connection between the Williams family and the decisions made by Apex's administrators, this could be a game changer. But we need more than just these documents. We need a witness. Witness? Ethan asked, confusion flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? We need someone from inside the school, someone who can confirm that this money and influence directly affected the competition, Grace explained. Someone who was there, who saw it happen, someone who can talk to the media. Ethan's stomach dropped. A witness. Someone willing to risk everything to speak out. That's going to be hard to find. Grace nodded. I know. But this is the only way to make the story stick. Without that human element, it's just a bunch of papers. People won't believe it unless they hear it from someone who's been on the inside. Olivia sat back, crossing her arms. So we need to find someone who's been involved in the competition from the beginning. Someone who knows what's been going on behind the scenes. Do you think we could talk to a teacher or staff member? Maybe, Grace said, her voice thoughtful. But it's risky. If we approach the wrong person, we could blow the whole thing wide open too soon. We need to be careful who we trust. But I have an idea. Ethan's interest peaked. What is it? Grace leaned in, lowering her voice. There's a former student who graduated a few years ago. Her name is Mia Harper. She was one of the top competitors at Apex during her time there, and from what I've heard, she was always suspicious of how the competitions were run. She didn't graduate on the best terms, and there are rumors that she was pushed out of the program because she started questioning things. Ethan's mind raced. Mia Harper. He had heard her name before, but he didn't know much about her. How do we find her? Grace gave them a small smile. Leave that to me. I'll reach out to her. In the meantime, you two need to be careful. Whoever we talk to about this, we need to be sure they can be trusted. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. Grace reached out to Mia Harper, and after a few initial exchanges, she agreed to meet. Ethan and Olivia were on edge, wondering how the conversation would go. Would Mia be willing to speak out? Or would she turn them away, too scared to get involved? The meeting took place at a small park just outside of town. It was an overcast day, and the gray skies seemed to match Ethan's mood. He and Olivia arrived early, anxiously pacing near a bench. You think she'll show? Olivia asked, her voice tight. I don't know, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But we have to try. If we don't get this witness, we can't move forward. Minutes passed like hours, and just as Ethan was about to suggest they leave, a figure appeared in the distance. She was tall and athletic-looking, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. As she got closer, Ethan recognized her instantly, Mia Harper. She stopped a few feet away, looking them both over with cautious eyes. Grace said you two were the ones who've been digging around. I'm Mia, she said, her voice low and wary. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward, offering his hand. Ethan. This is Olivia. Mia hesitated, then shook his hand briefly. She seemed to study them for a moment, as if trying to determine whether they could be trusted. I don't know how much I can help you, she said, her tone sharp. But I'll listen. What do you need? Ethan glanced at Olivia, then turned back to Mia. We need you to tell us what you know. What really happened at Apex? The competition, it wasn't just about talent, was it? It was rigged, manipulated by people with power. Mia's face hardened, and she looked away for a moment, as if weighing her options. I knew something wasn't right. But it was hard to speak up, you know. I was just a kid trying to make it. They had their hands in everything, money, sponsors, the administration. If you didn't play along, you were out. Olivia leaned forward, her voice urgent. We have evidence, documents. We need you to confirm what we found. Can you do that? Can you help us expose them? Mia looked at them, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. I can help. But we have to be careful. If I'm caught talking about this, my life is over. I don't want to end up like the others, pushed out, silenced. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. The final piece. Then let's do this, he said, his voice steady. Together. The weight of the secret they carried felt heavier with each passing day. Now that they had a credible witness in Mia Harper, the stakes had never been higher. As Ethan and Olivia sat in the dimly lit corner of their usual café, preparing for what they hoped would be their final step, the enormity of what they were about to do settled on their shoulders. Do you think this will be enough? Olivia asked, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I mean, we've got the documents, we've got Mia's testimony. But there's so much at stake here. If we mess this up. We won't, Ethan interrupted, his voice steady. This is the truth. It's undeniable. And we're not doing this alone anymore. Grace is on our side, Mia's on our side. We've got people who want to see this exposed as much as we do. But even as he said it, a part of him couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready for what was coming. They were about to take the fight to the media, to show the world the dirty secrets of Apex Academy. There was no going back now. Grace had arranged for them to meet with a trusted reporter who had been working with her on exposing corruption in education. The plan was simple: deliver the evidence, provide Mia's testimony, and let the story break wide open. Ethan glanced down at the stack of papers in front of him, the sealed envelope containing everything they had uncovered, the emails, the financial documents, the internal communications, and Mia's signed statement. The final pieces of a puzzle that, once completed, would shatter the carefully constructed facade of Apex Academy. He felt a wave of apprehension wash over him as he thought of the people who would go to any lengths to stop them. The Williams family. The school's administrators. They would do whatever it took to bury this truth. But they couldn't back down. They had come too far. The meeting with the reporter was set for the following evening. Ethan and Olivia arrived early, their nerves taut, but the air in the room was calm, almost eerily so. Grace had already arrived, her eyes scanning the room as if she were assessing potential threats. She was always cautious, always calculating, but today there was something more in her demeanor, something that told Ethan this wasn't just another story to her. This was personal. The reporter arrived just a few minutes later. His name was Alex Turner, and he had the look of someone who had seen it all. He was in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude that made it clear he wasn't in this business to make friends. Ethan couldn't help but feel a bit of relief when he saw Grace's handshake with Alex. Both were professionals, and that meant everything to them. Ethan, Olivia, Grace greeted them, motioning to the reporter. This is Alex Turner. He's the one who's going to help us get this story out there. Alex, meet Ethan and Olivia. They're the ones who've been digging into the mess at Apex Academy. Alex nodded, his gaze flicking between them. I've been briefed on the basics. I understand the gravity of this, but I need to know one thing before we go any further. He turned to them, his eyes sharp. Are you sure about this? Because once the story breaks, there's no turning back. Ethan swallowed hard, his heart thudding in his chest. We're sure, he said firmly. This isn't just a school competition. This is about people's lives, about an entire system being corrupted. We can't let them get away with it. Alex studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. Let's get to work, then. Grace handed over the sealed envelope. Here's everything we've gathered. The documents, the emails, and Mia's statement. We've got the proof. It's all in there. Alex took the envelope carefully, his fingers brushing the edges of the papers as if he understood the significance of what they held. I'll make sure this goes to the right people. But you need to understand the consequences of what you're doing. There will be pushback. There will be threats. But if you're ready for that, then we're in this together. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. The weight of the situation had never been clearer. They weren't just about to expose corruption in a school, they were about to change lives. And some people weren't going to let that happen easily. "We're ready," Olivia said, her voice resolute. Ethan looked at her, amazed by her courage. In all the chaos, Olivia had been his constant, the one person who had stood by him through every twist and turn. Together, they had uncovered the lies. Together, they were going to bring them down. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and late-night meetings as the story began to take shape. Alex worked tirelessly, getting the information out to key media outlets, ensuring that every detail was correct, every fact backed up. The pressure mounted as they moved closer to the story breaking. Ethan and Olivia stayed on edge, their nerves fraying with each passing hour. And then, it happened. The first headline appeared in the local news: Apex Academy exposed, how corruption and power manipulated the Apex Invitational for years. The story spread like wildfire. The media storm that followed was unlike anything Ethan had imagined. News outlets from all over the country picked up the story, eager to report on the scandal that had rocked the prestigious school. The Williams family's name was dragged through the mud, their connections with the administration laid bare for all to see. And then came the repercussions. There were protests. Lawsuits. Public outcry. Apex Academy's board was forced to respond, scrambling to minimize the damage. But the truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Mia's testimony was broadcasted, her face as she spoke out about the corruption that had tainted her entire high school experience was a powerful symbol. She was a former student, no longer tied to the school, and her bravery in speaking out gave others the courage to follow suit. As the weeks passed, the fallout continued. Key figures within the administration were fired or resigned. The Williams family, once untouchable, found themselves under investigation. But for Ethan and Olivia, the weight of the victory didn't feel like a triumph, it felt like a new beginning. They had exposed the truth. But it had cost them more than they had anticipated. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly began to settle back into a new normal for Ethan. He couldn't shake the feeling that something inside him had changed. The boy who had been unsure of his place in the world, the boy who had once doubted his own abilities, now stood taller. He had faced the most formidable challenge of his life, and he had won. But what mattered most wasn't the victory. It was the journey. The people who had helped him along the way. And the lessons he had learned about courage, justice, and the importance of speaking up, no matter the cost. As Ethan sat in his room, looking out the window, he felt a sense of peace. The world wasn't perfect, but he had done what he could to make it better. And that, he realized, was enough. The days following the media storm felt like a blur, an endless cycle of headlines, interviews, and public outrage. Ethan had always thought that justice would feel like a victory, a sense of triumph and satisfaction. But as the dust settled and the story faded from the headlines, all he felt was exhaustion. The world had changed, Apex Academy had been exposed for what it truly was, but Ethan, in many ways, was still trying to process what it all meant. It had been weeks since the story broke. The Williams family was under investigation, and the school's board had been forced to respond to the scandal. Apex Academy, once a prestigious institution, was now in chaos, with protests erupting on the campus and students and faculty demanding accountability. The administrators who had been complicit in the corruption were either fired or resigned, but that wasn't enough for some people. They wanted answers, real answers. They wanted justice, not just for the competition but for every student whose potential had been manipulated and crushed for the sake of power and profit. Ethan and Olivia had stayed out of the spotlight, taking a back seat to the whirlwind of media attention. They had done their part, and now they needed to rest, to breathe. The reality of their actions was beginning to sink in. Their small act of defiance had taken down an empire, but with it had come a price. They had made enemies. They had risked everything. And now, as the world watched, they had to navigate the fallout. Ethan sat at the window of his room, looking out at the neighborhood that seemed so familiar yet distant now. The world outside was calm, the birds chirping and cars driving by, life going on as usual. But for him, everything felt different. He wasn't the same person who had walked into that school months ago, unsure of where he fit in, unsure of who he could trust. Now, he knew who he was, and more importantly, what he stood for. "Hey, you okay?" Olivia's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway of his room, leaning against the frame with a concerned look on her face. Ethan turned to her, offering a small smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Olivia raised an eyebrow, stepping inside. "About what?" He shrugged. "Everything. The way things changed. It's strange, you know. Everything we went through, everything we fought for, it's like it happened in a different lifetime. The world's still spinning, but I feel like I've stepped out of it for a minute." Olivia smiled softly and sat down on the edge of his bed. "Yeah, I get that. I think we both need a break. It's been a crazy few months. But you know what? We did something incredible. We exposed the truth. And people are finally starting to see it for what it really was." Ethan nodded, but the weight of the moment still hung heavy in his chest. "Yeah, we did. But it's hard to just move on after everything that's happened. I mean, the fallout's just beginning, right? People are still fighting to protect the system we brought down. And I wonder, is it really over? Will anything ever truly change?" Olivia let out a long sigh. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But we gave people a chance to see the truth. We made sure they couldn't ignore it anymore. The rest is up to them." Ethan looked at her, feeling a sense of gratitude he couldn't put into words. Without Olivia by his side, none of this would have been possible. She had been his rock, his strength when he felt like giving up. And even now, as the storm of consequences raged around them, she was the one person who made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they had done something worthwhile. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Olivia stood up and walked toward the door, calling over her shoulder, "I'll get it. You stay here." Moments later, Olivia returned with a small package in hand. "For you," she said, handing it to Ethan with a curious look on her face. Ethan took the package, wondering what it could be. He hadn't ordered anything. He tore the tape off and opened it, revealing a small, ornate box inside. It was beautifully crafted, with intricate designs etched into the wood. He opened it carefully, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a medal. It was the same medal that the winner of the Apex Invitational had always received, the same one that Josh had worn around his neck so proudly. A small note was tucked inside the box. Ethan pulled it out, unfolding it with care. The note was simple, handwritten in neat, familiar script. "You did what I couldn't. Thank you for giving us all a chance. You're the real winner." It was signed simply, Mia Harper. Ethan stared at the medal for a long time, his mind racing. Mia. She hadn't just spoken out, she had sent him the very thing that represented everything they had fought against. She had given it to him, not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of what they had accomplished. Olivia came over, her eyes falling on the medal. "Wow. That's something." Ethan nodded, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the medal. "It is. It's everything we stood for. The truth. The fight. And now, it's in my hands." As the weeks passed, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Ethan and Olivia graduated from high school, and while the shadow of the Apex scandal loomed over the ceremony, it didn't define them. They had done what they set out to do, expose the truth, and that would stay with them forever. Mia, too, had begun to rebuild her life. She had moved away, started a new chapter, and though she had faced a lot of challenges, she had never regretted the decision to speak out. She had become a symbol of resistance, a voice for those who had been silenced. Ethan found himself thinking about the future more than ever before. He had options now, doors were opening, not just because of the scandal, but because of who he had become through the experience. He wasn't the same boy who had struggled to fit in at Apex. He had found his voice, and he intended to use it. As he stood at the window, watching the sunset on a peaceful evening, Ethan felt a sense of closure. The fight wasn't over, there would always be more battles to fight, more injustices to uncover. But he was ready for whatever came next. He had learned that the hardest challenges often led to the greatest growth, and now, with the world at his feet, he was ready to face it all. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?